Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Dill, one of the more hotly contested conversations, not only within Michigan fans, but really in the college football landscape. And I say college football landscape because you make no mistake about it. Like, this Michigan defense is national championship caliber. Can this Michigan offense win at the highest level? Can they beat a team like Texas with Davis Warren at quarterback? And I think what's so fascinating about this conversation is, dude, we hopped on immediately Saturday night, kind of just gave a live reaction and thoughts on what we saw. And we asked you guys in the comment section kind of this same question. And there were hundreds of comments all having kind of different opinions and takes. I think that's the most fascinating part of this conversation. I think there are legitimate arguments that hold weight on both sides of the coin, right? Davis Warren showed us some things that give you a lot of confidence heading into 2024. He was exceptional working those short intermediate route trees. He's a very accurate quarterback, but at the same time, you didn't really see a ton of juice within this Michigan offense, specifically attacking downfield. We saw some things that probably need to change within this. Well, let's get into that conversation. Talk about what this Michigan offense can look like with Davis Warren as he gets more comfortable. Now, before we get into it, as always, to the Michigan fans, would love for you guys to let it fly in the comment section. Again, legitimate arguments that hold weight on both sides of the coin. Would love to hear from you guys. And of course, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. As Michigan fans, it's been a blast talking this quarterback room and quarterback position battle. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. And Dill, without further ado, let's start with, and I think we both rewatched this game a couple of times since Saturday night. And I kind of came away saying I feel better about Davis Warren than I was feeling Saturday night. What did we like from Davis Warren that we saw against Fresno State Saturday night there?
Well, I think you said it best. At the end of the day, he is high level accurate. And that's
Yes.
one thing that I think really shined, and especially with his relationship with Colson Loveland. I mean, they were getting the ball into tight windows, into good coverage. And when you have a good tight end who can make plays in traffic, and you have a quarterback who can fit the ball in where it needs to be fit in, accurate and on time, I think that is like the key ingredient essentially to being a quality quarterback. So he certainly has like the building block to do it. And I also think for this Michigan team, he takes care of the ball really effectively. He didn't really put the ball in harm's way. I know that interception he threw, but I don't like hate the decision. It wasn't like a horrible decision. It just wasn't a well executed deep
Yeah,
ball.
he was a little late with the throw. It was a little bit underthrown. I think Freddie Moore also has to be a little bit more competitive at the catch point. I didn't think it was a great effort from Freddie Moore. At the very least, that should have been an incompletion. I don't think that should have been an interception. You got to, if you want to win a national championship, you need to have your wide receivers going up and making those kind of plays, or at least being competitive at the catch point, which we didn't really get from the young receiver Freddie Moore. Dill, I think one of the things that really inspired me is if this Michigan offense looks at its peak, it is the quarterback developing an elite connection with Colson Loveland, who is by far the biggest difference maker on this Michigan offense. And you saw that. I mean, Davis Warren is exceptional at those kind of throws that really fit what Colson Loveland wants to do as a route runner and as a pass catcher. I think even more importantly, we saw Davis Warren have a ton of success inside of 10 yards, right? Those short intermediate route concepts where you look at the pieces that are around Davis Warren and say, those are our kind of pieces, right? Samaj Morgan, Tyler Morris, Colson Loveland, kind of the three featured pass catchers. And I would throw in the running backs, like guys like Donnie Edwards. Those are all guys that want to work in those short intermediate route concepts. I think the conversation might be a little bit different if we had, some animals on the boundary that could work really well vertically down the field. That's just not how this Michigan offense and wide receiver room is constructed. Maybe we're having a different conversation if that's what the offense looks like. But because our wide receivers thrive so much in those short intermediate route concepts, I look at Davis Warren and say, I think he can fit really well in terms of what Michigan wants to do on the offensive side of the football. Now, I think all the Michigan fans, even if you are kind of on the Davis Warren train, say we need to make some significant changes heading into week 2 against Texas. Now, I preface this conversation with I don't think Michigan showed the whole playbook against Fresno State. It was a very vanilla offense. Wasn't asking Davis Warren to do too much. My one concern with Davis Warren that I had coming away from it is there were a lot of times where he's not really looking to push the ball down the field, right? He kind of has his first read in mind. And Dill, how many times during that football game did we see Davis Warren come off his first read? It was extremely rare, if any, right? He kind of knew where he wanted to go with the football. He was able to execute those throws at a high level, but you didn't really see that I don't know if the right word is like killer instinct in terms of, hey, when I have the opportunity, I'm going to make this defense pay vertically down the field. He was 1 of 5 on throws 10 plus yards down the field. His average depth of target was extremely low. That's probably the one like concern I would have in terms of Davis Warren operating this offense.
And that to me gets to a bit of a mentality thing. Like it's not like necessarily a physical limitation, if you will. Because I
Agreed.
think
I think he has a significantly, sorry to interrupt you, but I think he has a significantly better arm than a lot of people give him credit
no,
for.
the arm is there to do it. I mean, you saw it. Like he can get the ball with good velocity out to the places he needs to get it. I just think you're kind of right. He needs to kind of make that switch to being willing to do it. I think when you say, "Oh, he goes to his first route and then checks it down," or he goes for through his read and is very quick to check it down, even when there wasn't really a ton of pressure, I felt like the check down was way too quick. And again, like I think for Michigan, that's like that two sides of the coin, if you will, argument is yeah, that's kind of what Cade McNamara was for Michigan. And Michigan obviously won a lot of games under the Cade McNamara system. But when you're going to go try to win big games and beat really, really good teams, if that's how you're playing quarterback, you have an extraordinarily small margin of error. And Michigan was able to really just slam it on Ohio State, and Ohio State wasn't physically ready to deal with that in 2021. But Cade McNamara doesn't win the game in 2022 against Ohio State. He doesn't win the game against Ohio State in 23 because Ohio State was ready to kind of match physicality to an extent with that Michigan team. So if Davis Warren's going to play that conservative and that cautious, Michigan's going to have ultra fine margins when they go up and play big dog
Yeah,
teams.
and I think there's two conversations to have. One, I wonder if like Sherrone Moore or Kurt Campbell, in terms of designing the game plan, was like, hey, we're just going to give you some easy throws. We're not going to ask you to do too much. Let's just keep the ball out of harm's way and kind of make the throws we're going to ask you to make. That certainly could be something because again, I think I see the Cade McNamara comp to Davis Warren. I think he's got a much better arm than Cade
He
McNamara. I mean, the
definitely
ball
does.
coming out.
But I just mean that's how he was playing. That's like how
Yes.
they were almost game planning against Fresno State. And that, okay, he might have the physical ability to do it, but that still needs to be his mentality and his will
Yeah.
to go.
And it was his first start for the defending national champions night game against a team that was no walkover team. Like, I think that Fresno State team is going to be very good in the Mountain West. Like, that's still talking about 20-point win against a team that should win 8-9 football games. I think one of the other concerns, I mean, there was 0. So PFF has that stat where it's like how many turnover worthy plays. He had one, obviously, to Freddie Moore. 0 big time throws. Like there just wasn't many of those throws that you kind of need to have if you want to be a national championship caliber offense. JJ McCarthy was never asked to make those big time throws that often, but when he was asked to make them, he certainly made them. And I think that's what made Michigan's offense national championship caliber in
And
2023.
that's where I kind of push back on some of the Michigan fans, and sometimes you hear that like, oh, well, we just need a quarterback to manage the game. It's like, yeah, Michigan wins 9 games with a quarterback who's only managing the football game and being very cautious. But I just don't see a lot of teams winning at that real high level when your quarterback doesn't do something special. Even Stetson Bennett, I feel like people kind of give
Great.
him a bad rep, but like you go back to some of those title games, like go back to that Ohio State game in 22, he makes some big time football plays. And I think Davis Warren, again, my issue is I feel like he's got that in him. I
Yeah.
think he's got the accuracy, the arm talent to make those plays, but there's got to be a mentality shift.
And that's the thing is we're going to find out. Like we're asking this question: Can Michigan beat Davis? Can Michigan win at a high level in 2024 with Davis Warren? We're about to find out because we're going to play a top 5 team at home Saturday afternoon. Davis Warren, if Michigan wins that football game, Davis Warren is going to have to make a few of those throws. Now, I'm not asking Sherrone Moore and Kurt Campbell to ask Davis Warren to consistently make those throws, but at a certain point in that football game, Davis Warren's going to be asked to make one of those throws. And if we can see him make those throws, my confidence suddenly kind of goes through the roof in terms of this Michigan team with Davis Warren under center. My last concern is that if he can't make some of those throws and if we don't really have much of that, we can punish you vertically. If you kind of want to load the box and stop this run, it's going to be hard to beat teams like Oregon, Texas, and Ohio State when you look at Texas and say that's really a good front seven. But when they start adding bodies into the box and start leaving the wide receivers on islands, and we don't have that capability of pushing the ball down the field and punishing teams that start to load the box, then it becomes a problem. So again, we just got to see Davis Warren, which we both think he is much more capable than many people think in terms of making those throws. We just didn't see him make those throws against Fresno State. You want to see him make those throws against
But
Texas, and I
you
think
also didn't see him like try to make those throws because even like
agreed.
again, it's one thing to just make them and be really consistent, but that needs to be on tape. That needs to be something that teams fear. Because if it's not, then they play that way. And if Michigan doesn't get the ground game going, it's proven to be very hard for Michigan to move the ball.
Let's talk about the ground game, because that was there was a lot of people in the comment section saying, "Hey, we're spending too much time talking about the quarterback position and not enough about the offensive line," which I think was very accurate. Like I came away with the same takeaway Saturday afternoon or Saturday night, I should say, was wow, Michigan's offensive line didn't impose their will as much as I kind of would expect them to against Fresno State. The rewatching, I don't think the offensive line was nearly as bad as I think we all felt Saturday night. I think you saw some really bad busts in terms of pass pro, and obviously Giovanni Elhadi, who I think had a phenomenal game on average, obviously had that blown block. Outside of a few bad plays, I think the Michigan offensive line, even in the run game, kind of blocked it up pretty well. I think we're just, as Michigan fans, not used to seeing those blown assignment type things, because for the last 2 years, we're just playing with an NFL offensive line, guys that have played a ton of college football that never really busted any of those. I mean, we had a guy that was making his first start at center. The last 2 years, we had Olu and Drake Nugent, guys that have played a ton of football at the center position. And so, at least my takeaway after watching the game back a couple of different times, I think physically the offensive line is going to be fine. There's plenty of talent on the offensive line. I just want to see the unit kind of clean it up and be a little bit more consistent down and down out.
And by the end of the game, I thought they started to show it. I mean, that last kind of drive they put together,
agreed.
That's kind of vintage Michigan. That's what you want to see, resetting the line of scrimmage. I also think you got to have the conversation about who's going to get the tote the ball them for the most part, and who's going to be that primary ball carrier. Because at the end of the day, you can look at these stats. I mean, it was drastically different when Clell Mullings was being the bell cow and leading the way, because he just does simply run the ball far more physically. And I kind of looked, there was a sequence of events in that it was either third or fourth quarter, same drive. Clell Mullings meets a linebacker in the hole, falls forward for 2 or 3 extra yards. Donovan Edwards meets that same linebacker in the hole, gets stonewalled. And in those 2 or 3 yards, when you're kind of the Michigan offense and what's made them such a weapon in the past couple of years, Blake Corum was incredible at getting those yards. Michigan was always in kind of that 2nd, 4th, 2nd and 5 kind of situation. And at the end of the day, with Donovan Edwards, there's just too many runs where the contact balance isn't good enough. The physicality, running in through guys and getting those hard yards, he just doesn't do it as consistently as Clell Mullings. So I think Michigan's got to kind of take a hard look in the mirror, if you will.
Well, I think you saw them take that hard look, because who was getting the carries in the fourth quarter? Like when that last drive that Michigan drove down and scored, and you texted me and said that looked like a Michigan offense. Who was the running back during that drive? It was Clell Mullings. I think Sherrone Moore and that staff certainly noticed it too. Dylan, I think you made a good point. Like 2nd and 5 versus 2nd and 8. That's those 3 yards. It might not be that important to other teams that are a little bit more vertically passing, but for Michigan's offense, that's how we win football games, because that 2nd and 5 turns into a 3rd and 1. That 3rd and 1 turns into a new set of downs, and we just control the time possession, work our way methodically down the football field. We just won a national championship with that recipe last year. It's really important, and I'm not saying Donovan Edwards shouldn't get touches. Like, Donovan Edwards is a playmaker, has come up with some.
He's got to roll in this offense. I just don't know that it should be the primary down and down out.
I almost think it should be the same relationship that Blake Corum and Don had last year, where, hey, Clell Mullings is the quote unquote RB1 bell cow. He's getting 15 to 20 touches a game, and then you're sprinkling in Donovan Edwards in kind of unique spots where he can give you that explosive playmaking that we all know Donovan Edwards can have. Though the number that kind of stood out to me, and it's easy to just point at yards per carry, which certainly kind of shows, right? Don, 2.5 yards, Clell Mullings, 6.1. But I think more importantly, let's look at yards after contact per carry. Donovan Edwards, yards after contact, 1.6 per carry. Clell Mullings was at 4.2. I mean, that is a drastic difference. That's the definition of 2nd and 8 versus 2nd and 5. And so, Clell Mullings forced 5 missed tackles. Donovan Edwards forced 0. I don't think it was particularly a good game from Donovan Edwards regardless. Like, again, I'm not telling this kid to just sit on the bench and not play him. But how we want this Michigan offense to look, how we're used to it looking, is with a running back like Clell Mullings that can get those hard yards.
And that's going to be the one thing I look, because, again, I think it's going to be very hard for Davis Warren to be particularly successful, not only because of his own abilities, if you will, but also just with the pass catching unit and maybe not being quite what like a Texas or what or an
Do
Alabama.
we see? Sorry, I just kind of came to this. Did we see Donovan Edwards get utilized like in the slot or motioned out as a pass catcher once? I can't think of. I know we went to him one or two times in the passing game, but it was kind of out of the backfield. I wonder if we can get Donnie more involved as a pass catching threat, because when you've seen Donovan Edwards make big plays, that's kind of been where it is. And so I'll be interested to see, Dylan. I would not be surprised again if Kirk Campbell just kind of trotted out an offense that didn't want to put much on film. So I think we're going to get our answer not only to the Davis Warren conversation, but how this Michigan offense schematically is going to look week 2 against Texas, because that's one of those games where you bust out all the stops. Like maybe we didn't show a ton of plays that we want to run week 1 against Fresno State, putting them in the chamber for Texas. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Michigan offense that looks schematically quite different from what we saw Saturday night against Fresno State. We'll continue to have this conversation. We're going to take a look into this Michigan defense because it is freaky good, we think. We'll sign out there, though. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. Would love to hear your takes on the Davis Warren conversation. It's a fascinating conversation. We'll get in there, chop it up with you guys. Appreciate y'all rocking with it, and we'll talk to y'all